Excellencies, distinguished participants, good morning. Let us get started. I think that we still have a few who are trickling in. As you can see, we have a Red Cross fair for the first time at Chula on campus. So the bad news is that it has caused a commotion and it's crowded. So you've had to park at the building a little bit away. And I apologize for any inconvenience that may have been caused. But the good news is that you can do a lot of shopping. There are all kinds of things for sale, for purchase. So I really encourage you to see for yourselves. This event, this seminar, ASEAN-Australia Relations After 40 Years, was originally scheduled for May 28th. But we had political change several days before then, so we had to postpone this event. I want to thank Dr. John Blaxland, our main speaker today, for agreeing to come here. We didn't have to pay for his flight, he was already in town. And thanks to Facebook, I saw that he was in town, so I said, hey, you must come and speak. So he's done that. Before we proceed into the main issues of the seminar, I also want to thank the Australian Embassy, the Head of Mission, Ambassador James Wise, for co-hosting, sponsoring this seminar today. And I would like to also thank Professor Supachai Yavaprabhas, the Dean of the Faculty. ISIS is under the Faculty of Political Science. So let us begin with some opening remarks, some welcome remarks from the Dean, Ajahn Supachai, and then followed by opening remarks from Ambassador Wise.
Excellencies, James Wise, Honorable Speaker, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, again, it is my delight to have this opportunity to welcome all of you to this public forum on ASEAN-Australia relations in Asia transformation. And as a Dean, I would like also to apologize for any inconvenience that you may encounter during coming here. Actually, today not only the race course fair, today is the day that the new students come to the universities. So our intake this year is around 8,000 students for undergraduate students. So they are here at the university for the first time for the registration. So the university may be quite crowded. And as you may know, you are in Thailand for quite a while. When the students come, sometimes the parents accompany them. Sometimes not only one, but two or three. So the university are quite crowded. But I think look at it at the positive side. You will not see this kind of event happen. I have been in the university for almost 40 years, and this is the first time that we have the Red Cross Fair in the university, and at the same time we have the new student come at the same time. So I hope you will not only enjoy the forum today, but after the forum, please spare some time to visit the Red Cross Fair and enjoy yourself. Welcome and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Professor Supachai, colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to all of you at this event to mark the 40th anniversary of Australia's relationship with ASEAN. Thank you, Professor Supachai, for your opening remarks. Thank you also to ISIS for co-hosting this event with the embassy. In particular, thanks to Dr. Thitinan, Pongsudhirak, the director of ISIS, who will moderate today's forum. Because he's a first-rate analyst himself, and because he's such a persuasive person, Dr. Thitinan has attracted some fine speakers for us. And I'm very grateful to all of our speakers, Dr. John Blaxland, Ms. Gwen Robinson, Mr. Umesh Pandey, and Kavi Chongkittavorn for joining us and speaking to us today. I'd like very briefly to set the scene by saying a little about how Australia's relationship with ASEAN started, then a few words about how it has grown over the last 40 years, and a few more words about where it is heading. It all started with a modest meeting in Canberra in 1974 between officials from Australia and the then 5 ASEAN countries, who decided collectively that Australia and ASEAN should pursue some shared regional objectives. From that small meeting emerged a deep and complex relationship of political and security cooperation, economic dynamism, and people-to-people ties. Why, 40 years ago, in 1974, did Australia become ASEAN's first formal dialogue partner? Well, because by 1974, Australia was recognising more and more that its future lay in its region, that our geography was our destiny. For a Thai audience, that may sound strange. Thais are acutely aware of their geography. Your geography is in your DNA. Your geography has always deeply affected the way you see the world and the way you interact with the world. Your geography has, if you like, always moulded your worldview. That's true for Thailand now, and it was true for Thailand in 1974. Your geography has always been your destiny. Nowadays, for Australians, our geography is also our destiny. But in 1974, for Australians, our geography had only just become our destiny. In Australia's first 150 years as a modern entity, from 1788 until the 1940s, Australia's worldview was heavily influenced by the geography of the places our leaders were from, and by the geography of the places most of our people were from. In other words, our worldview was heavily influenced by Britain, because our leaders and most of our people were from Britain, and Australia was very much part of the British Empire. From 1942, from the start of the Pacific War, that began to change. And by 1974, when our formal relations with ASEAN started, our political leaders and our strategic thinkers had developed a deeper appreciation of our geography, of our physical location in the Asia-Pacific region, adjacent to Southeast Asia and the island countries of the South Pacific. As Australians became more aware of where we are, as Australians became more aware of our geography, we interacted with our region as a neighbour. To cut a long but interesting story short, by 1974 we had realised, as I said before, that our geography was our destiny, and it's in that context Australia began to see the countries and peoples of Southeast Asia differently. We began to see them as people living next door, and in that context we began to see ASEAN as a logical partner. We began to recognise that by working with and through ASEAN we could help to build a stable and favourable regional environment that allowed our neighbours and ourselves to focus on national development. We began to recognise that through ASEAN we could help to integrate Australia's economy with the economies of our neighbours. In 1974, Australia's trade with ASEAN was less than $1 billion. Last year it was over $90 billion. Over 20% of that trade is with Thailand, our second biggest trading partner in ASEAN. So since 1974, our political, security and economic ties with ASEAN have grown quickly, especially as our neighbours have become more prosperous and more dynamic. In addition, our citizens have begun to know each other better through the flow of students and tourists and through business linkages. Nowadays, Australia and ASEAN are trying to fulfil a shared aspiration for regional economic integration by implementing the ASEAN-Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement and by negotiating the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. And with some ASEAN countries, we're also trying to negotiate a Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. From Australia's perspective, ASEAN's move towards an ASEAN Economic Community in 2015 is as welcome as it is historic. Australia is a willing partner and an able partner for ASEAN as it tries to bring its dream of a community closer to reality. We also want to work with ASEAN to strengthen broader regional cooperation, in particular through the East Asia Summit. The East Asia Summit has the right mandate and the right membership, with ASEAN as its centre, to engage the region to deal with strategic issues, be they security, trade or economic, to foster a stable, rules-based, open and inclusive region. Before the ASEAN Summit later this year, our Foreign Minister, Ms. Julie Bishop, plans to visit all the ASEAN member countries. In November, Australia and ASEAN will hold a commemorative summit in Myanmar. The summit will be an opportunity for us to reflect on the last 40 years and an opportunity for us to look forward to the next 40. Ladies and gentlemen, our deliberations this morning and similar events being held this year throughout ASEAN and in Australia will provide us with insights and food for thought as we prepare for the summit and as we prepare for the next 40 years of ASEAN-Australia cooperation. Thank you very much for your presence here today as we mark the 40th anniversary of dialogue partner relations between ASEAN and Australia.
Just want to introduce them briefly down the row, beginning with Dr. John Blaxland. Dr. Blaxland has been in the past the defense attaché here, Dr. Blaxland, and he is now with the ANU. A foremost expert on Asian security issues, Southeast Asia. He is frequently quoted and appeared on Australia's networks, the media, and so on. So we're very honored and privileged to have you with us today, Dr. Blaxland. And Kavi Chongkittavorn is a senior journalist, formerly with The Nation. He still writes a column with The Nation. He's an all-round, all-knowing when it comes to ASEAN, Southeast Asia, regionalism, regional issues. So thank you for joining us. And then Gwen Robinson, also a senior journalist who's been with the Financial Times. She has been posted across different continents. I think she's one of the most networked and very well-known senior journalists in Asia. She's also a senior fellow here with ISIS, and Kavi also is a senior fellow with ISIS doing free work for us. So thank you very much, Gwen Robinson. And Umesh Pandey is with the Bangkok Post. He's the editor of the Asia Focus part of the Bangkok Post. Recently, Umesh was in Australia on a tour, a study tour. So he'll have some reflections about Australia, Australia-Thai relations, Australia-ASEAN relations. Now, as a way of prefacing, I want to begin with a little provocation. The Ambassador Wise has said that, geography is destiny. I really like this notion. I work with this notion. For Thailand, geography has been destiny, but the Thais don't realize it. For Australia, they have to kind of be conscious of it because they're kind of a limbo country when it comes to the map. Out there, but not quite part of Southeast Asia, but not far away, not quite part of Europe, but very far away, and certainly nowhere near the United States, but yet a Pacific country. Australia is a rising middle power, certainly. We can see in many endeavors, scholarships, people to people, it has more resources to expend. So Australia has come a long way. ASEAN has come a very long way. We will see this period is a number of anniversaries. ASEAN has a 25th anniversary with South Korea, has a 40th anniversary with Australia. So ASEAN is being recognized for having come a long way, and now we have the ASEAN Community, 2015, the end of 2015. Yet ASEAN is full of problems. I think ASEAN has more problems now than the recent past. The domestic challenges in various countries, here Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia has a remarkable election, but the results will not be known for some time. It may be contested. And Myanmar has election next year. We see a lot more turbulence now in Myanmar's landscape. So domestic politics is a big challenge for ASEAN unity integration going forward. And there are other challenges, the security challenges from the South China Sea, which has divided ASEAN in the recent past, pitting maritime ASEAN states vis-a-vis the mainland ASEAN states, with China on one side, United States on another side, and ASEAN exists within this US-China rivalry or competition and cooperation. So a lot for us to discuss. We will begin with Dr. Blaxland's presentation on ASEAN significance and future from an Australian perspective. So Dr. Blaxland.
Excellency, Dr. Thitinan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's a great honour for me to be here with you, and a delight as well. And I am trained academically as a historian, and so my presentation will be with that slant, but I'm also, having worked for the Australian government for most of my career, it's very much got a policy relevant slant, which I'm hoping, given my time here in Thailand over a number of years, over the last 3 decades, will resonate and make some sense and hopefully be compelling. But I'll leave that to you and open for debate afterwards. I want to talk about a few things and about particularly focusing on security engagement with Southeast Asia, looking at Australia's angst over its historical and geographical context, and the ambassadors touched on that, the search for certainty in an uncertain world, and our sense of trying to find security initially from Asia and then with Asia, and then the various organisations, and then look at some trends and internal challenges. Now, touching on this first question about what have we Australians been trying to do? Well, for a long time we were trying to get security from Asia, and the idea of having security with and in Asia is a fairly recent imagination, a recent concept for us. But I like this orientation of the map because it gives you a sense of where Southeast Asia sits. It's not that's technically to the northwest of Australia, but when you tilt the map, you get a sense of the fulcrum of Southeast Asia, the significance of the geography and of the significance to Australia of that piece of space. Now, historically, Australia, and the ambassadors touched on this, the legacy is that we have looked outwards on Asia as something alien, as something not us, something to be fearful of. And planning, this is a strategic appreciation from 1947, shows the kind of strategic planning that was done in military circles even after the Second World War. Still very much looking at this kind of unknown lands, very alien terrain. But in the Second World War, Australians experienced an engagement with Thailand, with Asia, in a traumatic way that saw 16,000 Allied prisoners of war killed and 90,000 or so Asian labourers died during the construction of the so-called Death Railway between Thailand and Burma. And this left a very strong impression on many in Australia, and it's commemorated to this day. And it became apparent, and the ambassadors touched on this, just we really, Australia needed to start buying in on engaging and not letting this be something the Brits did for us. Because up until the Second World War, until 1942 especially, we had left foreign policy essentially to Britain. The shock of Singapore made us realise that we need to emerge out of Britain's shadow. And so in the post-Second World War period, Australia established diplomatic relations with Thailand in 1952. Shortly thereafter, when the Southeast Asian Treaty Organisation, or CETA, was formed in September 1954, Australia was there to sign up on that arrangement as well. CETO never quite managed to look much like NATO, but it still had a utility in terms of bridge building at the time. Australia contributed a squadron of Sabre aircraft based in Ubon in northeast Thailand during the Vietnam War, and that actually helped foster remarkably close ties between the Royal Australian Air Force and the Royal Thai Air Force, and those ties have endured. It's amazing how close the ties are between the two air forces. So we started to see a gradual shift from security from Asia to security in and with Asia. As we started to make friends in Asia, as we started to get to know Asians, as we started, particularly in the context of Thailand, getting to establish a relationship particularly with CETO in Bangkok, and starting to get to know people and develop friendships. We developed the Defence Cooperation Program in 1963. It's been going over 50 years now. It's now a multi-million dollar program. General Sayut Gurpon was the first graduate of Australia's Army Staff College in Queenscliff near Melbourne. General Sayut Gurpon, of course, went on to become Supreme Commander of the Royal Thai Armed Forces and head of Assoc. He's a remarkable individual, a great friend of Australia, and a symbol of the investment in the relationship that has endured for decades. And of course, the Crown Prince, a graduate of the Royal Military College Duntroon, my alma mater. He's 10 years my senior, so he wasn't at the college when I was there. But just symbolic of the depth and breadth of the ties between our two countries, which have been continued in recent years with a series of exercises, Air Force exercises, naval exercises, land exercises, special forces exercises, peacekeeping operation exercises. One's about to happen, Pirap Jabiru, I think, is about to commence in the next few days here in Bangkok, demonstrating that Australia remains committed to participating in activities with the Thai military because of the enduring significance, and I'll talk more about that significance, and also HADR, or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities. Now, Australia is engaged with exercises with a range of countries around the region, multilateral, bilateral and multilateral, and this map gives you a flavour of just the extensive engagement Australia has with regional countries, of which Thailand is one example. Now, the significance of the Thai role, the relationship with Thailand, Thailand is not a fair weather friend. It's a genuine friend of Australia. And I managed to make this point in a chat I had with our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, when considering what to do about the coup in Thailand. I made this point to her. I said, look, this is the country that came to Australia's aid when the chips were down in East Timor in 1999. No one else in ASEAN wanted to play. Not Malaysia, not Singapore, five-power defence arrangement partners of Australia. You would have thought closer, but with reasonable, understandable concerns about their own relationship with Indonesia, Thailand put its hand up and said, we'll be there with you, Australia. And they sent Major General Songgiti Jagabat, who was the previous Supreme Commander, and also about 1,000 troops to eastern Thailand, eastern East Timor, to a place called Baokau. And there's a picture there of General Bun San in the bottom left as well, who went on to be the commander of the UN Transitional Authority in East Timor, or UNTAD. I had dinner with him last night. Delightful man. But the point is that the investment in the relationship over 50 years has demonstrably been of benefit to Australia, as Australia has sought to engage constructively in the region, investing bilaterally in the relationship in Thailand and elsewhere has proven remarkably useful and for everybody concerned. And part of the issue here is, I think, that what we've realised in Australia is just how much of a fulcrum ASEAN has become, the centrality of ASEAN. ASEAN is, and I particularly like this diagram because it goes to show you just where ASEAN sits in the regional security forums equation. And it is extraordinary. There's plenty to criticise about ASEAN, and that it has its foibles, but it's remarkably pivotal. It remains a remarkably pivotal organisation. And while this is an oversimplification, of that significance, it does, I think, capture the essence of its significance, which we get in Australia to a certain extent, although I think Kavi might have some points to make about that afterwards. So, but there is, for Australia, the regional forums that are linked with ASEAN, that have ASEAN essentially as a fulcrum, are remarkably important to Australia. And admittedly, they have overlapping remits that point to complex regional security arrangements and also precarious regional relations. And there's differing perspectives and differing interests in the various players in ASEAN, the 10 countries and the external players that engage with ASEAN. And you know, one of the criticisms levelled against ASEAN is that progress is so incremental, and yet there is incremental progress, and that is a positive, and this is a glass half full phenomenon, I would argue. And of course, this plethora of forums that focus, that sort of revolve around ASEAN, do provide a level of great power engagement that would otherwise be problematic, and that is also a very constructive thing. Now, of course, the diversity of Southeast Asia makes unity difficult, and that diversity is multifaceted. It's not just cultural, it's linguistic, it's ethnographic, it's religious, historical, constitutional, it's legal, it's geographic, it's demographic. I mean, the variety and across Southeast Asia, it's phenomenal. The variance between Brunei and Singapore and Thailand and Indonesia and Vietnam, you know, a nominally atheist communist country, an arguably fundamentalist Muslim country, a multicultural cosmopolitan city-state. The variety is extraordinary, and yet there is compelling reasons for them to hang together, and the compelling reasons, I would argue, are growing stronger. Now, Australia's had buy-in on a range of forums. APEC is one that former Prime Minister Bob Hawke was instrumental in helping trigger the creation of early on in the late 1980s, as the Cold War was ending, as the momentum appeared to be building for reinventing the wheel, if you like, in terms of regional cooperation. And the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Forum, is symptomatic of that. APEC, interestingly enough, you know, you would have thought, what was this, an economic forum? How useful is that for other security-related issues? Well, in September 99, the meeting of APEC in Auckland provided a remarkably useful forum for Prime Minister John Howard, President Habibie, President Bill Clinton, and others to actually talk through East Timor and work through what could be done, what should be done, what would be done. And it was. And that forum is, we dismiss the significance of such forums at our peril. The ASEAN Regional Forum, since 1993 onwards now, 11 years old, 21 years old, has contributed, providing a venue for multilateral and bilateral dialogue and consultations, remarkable plethora of meetings that happens on the sidelines of the ARF. We know that decision making is by consensus, and the policy of non-interference and incremental progress. Moving at a pace that is comfortable for all, there's no question it's problematic, but it is moving. And I think that is a really constructive thing. And it's one of the reasons why I think Australia remains engaged in this forum and seeks to play a constructive and active role in it. And that transparency is promoted through this exchange of information, including relating to defence policy, encouraging the publication of defence white papers, and the networking of security officials. The networking is really not to be underestimated. Now, in a context for Australians, we struggle to appreciate the significance of form, the significance of face, the significance of formality and of precedents and of procedures. Australia, as you know, is some would accuse it's the convict roots as the cause of this, but it's a remarkably informal culture. Everyone's mate, everyone's first name, everyone is, if I was to go around calling myself Dr. John in Australia, I'd be called a pretentious so-and-so, and the so-and-so would not be the so-and-so, it would be a rude four-letter word. or longer. But the point is that Australians have to we recognise that engaging with Southeast Asia includes engaging with ASEAN form and function, and that for us is a bit challenging, but it's recognised. And those opportunities, those networking opportunities, provide remarkable opportunities for Australian officials and diplomats and others to get to build relationships, friendships, and engage with their counterparts. And that provides opportunities to shoot an email, to have a discussion, a sidebar conversation, informally grappling with complexity in an informal manner, which is so useful in ASEAN and in Asia context. The ARF senior officials meetings also provide opportunity for mutual confidence building through cooperative activities and cultivating habits of dialogue and consultation. And I'm a big believer in this. You know, and in my 3 years here when I was Defence Attaché, I went to a whole plethora of these meetings. And I remember, you know, there'd be a visiting delegate from Australia, and they'd say, this might have been their first meeting or their only meeting. They've come to me, at the end of the meeting, I said, well, what did we get out of that? You know, bugger all, mate. There was nothing going on. Well, in fact, there was, but it was incremental. And I actually made the point on a number of instances that, look, if you look back where we were a couple of years ago, we've actually made pretty good progress. We're actually starting to deal substantively with issues that on the surface, you know, if you just take that one day's meeting, may not look like much, but cumulatively it's not inconsequential, so that's good. Now, the Indian Ocean tsunami of the mid-2000s had a cathartic effect, and there was a silver lining to that dark phenomenon. And it was that it triggered a remarkable openness to collaboration on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. There's a picture, I think it's of HMAS Kanimbla with some landing craft on board that went to Aceh and participated in the recovery operations there. Who would have thought prior to the tsunami that Australian military forces would ever deploy to Aceh? It was simply inconceivable, and yet there we were. And so it triggered some thinking about how we needed to think afresh about engagement multilaterally, bilaterally and multilaterally. The ADMM construct, I think, could be connected to this phenomenon, and then the ADMM Plus that emerged in 2010, where the ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting invited the Plus 8 countries listed there on the right of the slide to join them in a range of forums to focus on humanitarian relief, maritime security, counter-terrorism and peacekeeping. This is groundbreaking stuff. Now in 2014 we might think ho-hum. Well, in 2009 it was not ho-hum. 5 years later, if you think about the cumulative effect of this arrangement, it's remarkably positive. Australia's played in that space since its inception and remains engaged for good reason. The East Asia Summit is another one, you know, and I know you guys are familiar with this, so I don't need to bore you with the details, but there's a whole range of security-related aspects to the East Asia Summit that complement the work that's done in the ADMM Plus construct and the ARF construct. And while, you know, some would argue, why do we need to go to all of these meetings? Well, it's part of it is simply being there, being engaged, networking, building relationships, keeping doors open, channels of communication open. And that's a good thing. Now, of course, why should Australia care? Why should we invest in all of these bloody relationships and these meetings that seem to make so little progress, you know? Wow, what's the point? Well, there's a lot of good reasons. And a couple of them that spring to mind are, firstly, that Australia's trade overwhelmingly relies on ASEAN being secure, being stable, being functional, being effective. And that's because most of our trade is in and with ASEAN and through ASEAN. ASEAN, as the ambassador said, you know, it's a very big trader for Australia. I think it's our third largest trading partner after China and Japan. When you aggregate it, it's enormous. The significance to Australia is enormous. We in Australia tend to see things more bilaterally, but when you aggregate it, it's significant. And policymakers in Canberra, by and large, get it. They get it. They get the significance. And of course, I had a chat to the ambassador about this, and he doesn't like the term Indo-Pacific. I happen to really like the idea of the Indo-Pacific. One reason is because I think it's kind of an all-encompassing, from an Australian perspective, an all-encompassing view of the economic and security space that affects Australia's destiny. The Indian Ocean is increasingly of trade and security significance to all of the countries of East Asia, all of the countries of Southeast Asia, and this picture just graphically illustrates the red spaces, shows you the heavily trafficked maritime spaces. And so you can understand why the Indian Ocean is gaining in significance. And of course you can see in there that Southeast Asia is kind of the fulcrum, and you can see it like in the previous picture, the trade choke points there. Those trade choke points are so important that they remain open and flowing and uninterrupted. And so the Indo-Pacific, this idea of this system being greater than just Southeast Asia, greater than just East Asia, greater than Australia and Southeast Asia, being a space that we all are affected by the dynamics at play in this space. I think it's a useful construct. It's not the only construct we can use, but I think it's worthwhile. And it also reflects, I think, the significance of the rise of India. India is a significant power. It's not going away. It's of growing importance to the security and economic prosperity of the what I'm calling Rory Medcalf called the Indo-Pacific. I just wish I'd thought of it first, but he got in there. So, but of course, underlying all of these factors is that there is what I would say a return of traditional security concerns in this neck of the woods, and I want to now touch on them briefly. The South China Sea is clearly the hottest one in this region, and with the 6 claimants listed there, obviously for all to see, and you can see there the 9 dashed lines, with more dashes there than the 9 ones that the Chinese map has. But the 9 dashes include not just the 6 claimant states, but the dashes around the word Malaysia, where the Y, S and I are, actually cross significantly into Indonesia's exclusive economic zone, the EEZ around Natuna Islands. And that means that Indonesia is affected by this as well, and it's really a significant conundrum for Southeast Asia. What do you do with this conundrum? And we're seeing white painted and red painted vessels firing water cannons against fishing vessels, against other vessels that are daring to transgress China's perceived exclusive space in the 9 dash line around the Spratly Islands, the contested spaces, and they're operating below the perceived threshold to trigger a war. They know the United States is not interested in fighting a war over a contested shoal. I mean, for crying out loud. No one in their right mind is going to do that. The Filipinos know that, the Vietnamese know that, and China knows it too. In contested areas, this challenges and exposes US guarantees, and the Chinese there's a certain amount of joie that you get out of experiencing Americans squirming over what to do when you promise that you're going to help the Filipinos, but you really can't do very much. And we've seen in the last couple of days China back down and de-escalate the oil rigs off the coast of Vietnam. There's a clever game being played here that's below the threshold, and it's when you think about it from China's interests, it's not unreasonable. They're actually trying to pursue China's interests without triggering a war, but by asserting themselves bilaterally with the Philippines, then with Vietnam, and telling everybody else to nick off. And everybody else is nicking off. And you have to ask yourself, well, is that in ASEAN's interest? We saw a little while ago what the Economist called a provocative route taken by a Chinese flotilla, Chinese naval flotilla that operated in and through the Indonesian archipelago and off near Christmas Island, Australian territory in the Indian Ocean, without advising us in advance. Now, there's actually nothing wrong with that. They're perfectly within their rights to do that, but it would have been nice. But they didn't have to, and they know it. And so there's a bit of a point there. There's an interesting dynamic at play here. And so the question is, look, are there any collaborative solutions that could emerge? Or do we just avert our eyes? Do we just say, look, it's Vietnam's problem, it's Philippines' problem, and it's Indonesia's problem, and, you know, what the hell, why should we care? Well, I would argue that in terms of the utility and resilience and durability of ASEAN, it matters. I would argue it does matter. Otherwise, ASEAN becomes inconsequential. And so I would argue that there is strength in unity. There's been talk about trying to get moving on from the declaration of a conduct at sea to a code of conduct at sea, and of course China's happy to put that off to never never, because they know they can bilaterally just handle it. Arguably, Southeast Asian countries should actually, they could declare a code of conduct that they will adhere to, and then perhaps challenge China to sign up to it. Not wait for China to buy in, just do it, and make it a declaratory policy. I mean, it's a one idea, and there's scope for arbitration, and there's one proposal to resolve overlapping claims. We've seen, you know, the International Court of Justice has been useful in resolving disputes between Malaysia and Singapore, between Malaysia and Indonesia and Supachai Ligatan. The ICJ, you know, we don't give this body enough significance in our calculus. I think it is potentially of huge consequence if we push for it to be used, and people and countries need to be prepared to perhaps, you know, lose, just like Indonesia lost against Malaysia and Malaysia lost against Singapore. You can't win, but you know what? It's better than going to war. Way better. So, now there's a few other concerns out there. Prawihan, or Prewihia, has been kind of settled, but there's still dispute about the border, about whose line matters. Which line, the American line or the French line? The French drawn line that came out of the Franco-Siam Treaty, or the American line, thanks to cartographers that came around drawing the maps after World War II? Well, you know the difference. It's quite significant, and of course the consequence of that significance is really not just about Prawihan, it's about the Gulf of Thailand and the oil and gas reserves. And that's obviously remains a point of contention and needs some resolution, and needs Thailand and Cambodia to creatively engage on it. Thailand's deep south, oh geez, where do you start? The list is so long, there's so many aspects to this problem. You know, there are more theorists as to what the issue is, as to how to solve it, and what the root causes are, than there are, you know, chicken noodle dinners. It's just ridiculous. Everybody's got a hobby horse about how to explain this. Everybody's got a political science theory to explain it. This is a quandary. It is multifaceted. I haven't yet heard one theorist explain compellingly the depths, the profound complexity, the historical animosity, and the tricky aspects of this phenomenon in Thailand's deep south. You know, people say, oh, it started in 2004. Well, did it really? Or did it start 100 years ago with the Anglo-Siam Treaty that cut up, you know, what was Patani and separated Patani and Yalar and Narathiwat as provinces of Thailand separate from Malaysia? I don't know. But some work needs to be done to break the logjam, and I must confess I'm not terribly optimistic about the work that's been done so far. But the regional consequences of Thailand's festering sore need to be recognised. While this has, for a long time, not been an international concern, you know, in a decade or so ago, people were saying, oh, is this part of the global war on terror? Well, you know, we know it's mostly localised. But this is a festering sore that is embarrassing to Thailand. It's a problem that needs some creative thinking. It needs some people to step back from their own little turfs and to reflect dispassionately, objectively, with a historical mindset, what is actually happening, just how complex it is. Admit that things have not worked and think creatively and with humility about the way ahead. And that's because I think this is not just in Thailand's interests, it's in ASEAN's interests. And if it's in ASEAN's interests, it's also in Australia's interests, I would argue. Now, Indonesia, just to give you a couple of other quick examples, Indonesia's had its spectrum of challenges as well internally that have distracted it from exercising what you would have thought might have been the leadership role in ASEAN, given that Indonesia is the largest and most consequential country in ASEAN itself. It's where the ASEAN Secretariat is, but it's got, the leadership question is still hanging in the balance between Jokowi and Prabowo. We still don't know how hard Prabowo is going to push to try and get his way. The question about democratic transition and reform and sustainable development, of course, extremism that is not yet gone away, not likely to go away, and thinking through that is a big part of thinking through the ASEAN security dynamics. Myanmar, it's really interesting to see what's happened in Myanmar in the last few years. Is this the new hope of ASEAN? Who would have thought 4 years ago that we would have seen Myanmar emerge as a country that would be about to have its second democratic election, or a partially democratic election? It's extraordinary, the transition we've seen. And of course there remain three real fears, I would argue, that dominate the political leaders' minds, their consciousness. The fear of external interference, which I think has subsided in the last couple of years, the fear of internal disintegration or balkanisation, which I think they've been, Thein Sein has been assiduously trying to contain and address, and the otherness, that the non-Burman sense of, particularly most pungently demonstrated in the way the Rohingya people are treated. These non-people, it's a real issue inside Myanmar. That people don't have ready answers to, but we do seem to be seeing a democratic consolidation, but there are a lot of questions about whether there is sustainable development. And of course, the bit that I find most interesting is the great power dynamics at work. How much influence is India likely to have? How much influence is China going to have? How important is that pipeline from Chokpu up to Yunnan? And what effect will that have on Myanmar's strategic thinking, its willingness to engage outside with the United States, with the rest of ASEAN as well? Is this a new independent player? Of course, the ambassadors touched on, and the ANZSTAR, quite a mouthful, the Australian, ASEAN, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. And the point here is that ASEAN is of growing significance to Australia, not just economically, but strategically. And we have a real concern about that. RCEP, the ambassadors touched on, I won't go into that in detail, but except to say that 9 out of Australia's top 12 trading partners are in RCEP. It matters to us, okay? It matters to Thailand, of course, but it really matters to Australia as well. But then so does the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm not so optimistic about this one. I think the bar is very high in terms of the standards that people are expected to meet to join the club. I suspect that one's going to present challenges. But the ASEAN Economic Community, now this is quite exciting from Australia's point of view as well. We're seeing, the goal of regional economic integration, but the security dimension implications, I don't think have been thought through yet. And ASEAN needs to, as it comes to becoming an ASEAN Economic Community, much like we saw with APEC in 1999, when you have an economic forum like this, there are spillover effects. And they certainly operate in the security space, because for economics to work, for the economies, for trade to be robust, to continue to grow, you need security. It's like oxygen. You take it for granted until you don't have it. And So you can't have economic prosperity without security. And when security is being threatened, when it's questionable, when people start having doubts, you undermine prosperity. And so this is an integral part of the equation, I would argue. AEC characteristics I don't need to bore you with. The one vision, one identity, one community. This is where ASEAN has been putting itself. But can the centrifugal forces be countered and contained? And I've rattled off a whole long list of them in the presentation so far. Can they be contained? Well, I believe that Thailand has a role to play in containing them. I really do. Thailand, I know the NCPO is really trying to reach out and do a couple of things. They've concerted coordination on a number of policy fronts in politics and security, economic and social cultural fronts as they engage with ASEAN, and I think that's a constructive thing. And it, you know, one of the positives of having a military in charge is you can make decisions. You don't need to argy-bargy with political factions. And so in this space that they've got while they are in charge, perhaps there are some really constructive things that can emerge out of this dark period, if you like, and maybe this is one of them. So Thailand, its prospects, Thailand has an important role to play. It can foster ASEAN coherence and effectiveness. It can help manage great power rivalry, and it can help the peaceful management of growing tensions. And we should remember, you know, Thailand has a proud tradition of balancing great powers, of playing statecraft to its best interests. I would argue that Thailand can well afford a reconception of its interests and of how to apply its adept statecraft. And it needs to, I would argue, see that as incorporating ASEAN, not just Thailand, because ASEAN is important to Thailand in a way that it has not been for a long, long time, if ever. And as great power competition increases, ASEAN needs to assume some great power pretensions itself, I would argue. So there we are at the crossroads between South and East Asia. I've spoken too long, I apologise, but thank you for listening.